he needs to talk without plugging in his headset. Okay. So that in the beginning, the app already is.
Obviously.
Should I run over to Salomon quickly?
Yeah, and tell him to pause and start without the headset plug, confusing the computer.
Yeah, I can actually see. I can see that he was on phone audio and not on computer audio.
Try to speak, guys. Don't you guys have other headsets?
On the audio tab, there should be a built-in, a drop-down menu that says built-in microphone, and has another microphone options.
Perhaps do we have anyone that could help him? And then we can get started and then he will join because of the time.
I'm concerned that that's something that has to do with his computer.
I can skip his part, and then when he comes, we'll go back in, and then I'll just make a mention that he's having some technical difficulties, that he should come in. Hermano, are you on?
Yep, I'm on. Can you hear me?
Gordon?
Okay.
Yep, I'm on.
Daniel, what's
okay?
The
okay. Vamos ter que mexer conforme. This will compromise the live session, but yeah, time is on. 8 o'clock. We'll start. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So yeah. Good luck, guys. I'm pressing start webinar.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Thank you for joining us today for the first edition of Absa E-Series. My name is Ernesto Gove, and I'm the Chief of Staff at Absa Bank Moçambique. Today we'll be holding a high-level conversation concerning the impact in the LNG value chain of Mozambique. To adapt to the paradigm, the industry will need to dig deep and transform in the tougher conditions. To help shed light, I'm delighted to introduce you to our speakers, Hermano Jovan, Gordon McIntosh. Salomon Yabanga is to join us shortly. Great to have you, gentlemen, and thank you for dedicating your time with us. Please introduce yourselves to our audience, starting with a guest participant. Gordon, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Ernesto, and good morning, everyone from Summerland, Scotland. It's really good to be back in Mozambique, if only virtually, and I'm looking forward to it. I am Chairman and Director of Aberdeen International Associates, an economic development consultancy based in Aberdeen, Scotland. But I spent most of my career in economic development in the oil and gas industry, starting with KPMG as an insolvency practitioner before joining the North East Scotland Development Authority, and then spending most of my career with Aberdeen City Council as Director of Enterprise Planning and Infrastructure. In 2018, I was asked to become Deputy Minister of Natural Resources in Newfoundland and Canada, and I returned from there earlier this year. So I'm looking forward today. Thank you.
I'm glad you're in, Gordon. We're excited for your contributions. Hermano, welcome. Likewise, thank you for joining us. Please introduce yourself to our audience.
Thank you to everybody who's joined the live webinar this morning. My name is Hermano Giovanni, so I'm heading the oil and gas sector in Absa Bank, Mozambique. So apart from the support that we do provide to the upstream and mid, we also do have value chain bank within our team. We also do have and have invested immensely in supporting the value chain, both in terms of financial support as well as partnership with a lot of efforts that are happening in the market to build capacity for local enterprises in order to participate in the value chain. So apart from that, during my bank also worked with other sectors, including consumer diversified, and I've also been fortunate to have a career prior to banking in logistics and freight forward. So I do look forward to engaging and touching base with the rest of you during the course of the webinar.
Thank you for your time, Hermano. I'm very keen to hear from you on the ground insights. Today we'll be looking at the following. To put in context our conversation, we'll be looking at the history of oil and gas in Mozambique, current project highlights, hurdles faced by foreign and local suppliers, and a Q&A session, and following, and also final considerations. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. Your active participation, so please be encouraged to address your questions. These will be addressed at the very end. So now, we will turn our time of our country's fossil fuel journey. This poll to check the poll with one question. First, natural gas exploration efforts in Mozambique occurred. Select one of the following. Guys, 1961, 1975, or 1998. I'll just give you a few more seconds. I can see we're already have answers. 35% have voted, so I think we'll stop now. So, Americans are inclined towards 1961. 1960, and what do you say of this? Is it?
Yeah. So, funny, the minority of the responders got it right. The answer with the least response is only 8% is actually the correct answer. The correct answer is 1904. The first exploration efforts of gas in Mozambique in 1904. So that's over 1 century ago. So just to give a bit of context, Ernesto, what did happen? It was the colonial era, as you all know. And the Portuguese at the time were pretty much of the first exploration efforts. And it did happen around what we call today the Mozambique Basin. And that's the same basin where, the Tamani projects and Banda projects by operators Sazol had taken place. Of the first exploration efforts, there was quite a limited outcome due to limited resources and limited technology at the time for gas exploration, so there wasn't really much success. So I saw that the majority of the crowd did answer 1961, and that's due to the fact that that was the period, the 1960s in Mozambique was a period where there was more success and progress in the actual gas discovery, despite the efforts made decades ago. So by the 1960s, between 1961 and 1967, that's where we saw international players also playing a role. You know, the likes of Gulf Oil international companies came in for the exploration efforts. And that's when, you know, the country became first aware of the 2.9 trillion cubic feet of gas in the same basin in the Mozambique basin of the country. You know, in the period between 1964 and 1975, that's when the independence took place. Mozambique eventually became an independent nation in 1975. And about 2 years after independence, the country was disrupted again by the civil war that took place between what we call today the ruling party versus the opposition party between 1977 to 1992. So the combination of the war for independence and the civil war did kind of rob the country of over 2 decades of economic development and over 2 decades of development that was robbed. However, we did see in the early 1980s, that's when the national oil company, Empresa Nacional de in the country, the first establishment. So, you know, after the Civil War and the 90s, we only saw, you know, a continuation of the exploration efforts around 1998 towards the late 90s. And that was pretty much Sazol that was in front of it. So finally, in the 2000s, that's the year when the PSA, which is an agreement between the government and Sazol, was signed, and first gas in Mozambique took place in the year 2004. And since then, in the country, as a result, even in development, if you look really lost, 2004, that's what was placed in favor of the local enterprises. You know, further development. And around the year 2006, I think the licensing round that took place in the era, that's when some of the first licenses were awarded, now in the Rovuma Basin. And that's the basin that's gotten a lot of, that's really put Mozambique on the map in terms of research. So that's the period where now political geopolitical shift. We become aware that the Rovuma Basin has over 180 trillion cubic feet of gas reserves. That really shifted ranking from number of gas 8. That's when we started seeing talks about Mozambique potentially being the next Qatar in terms of led to another. We now have the operators that we do have.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Limana. So what has been Absa's involvement in this process, especially as late with these massive projects? How have we played a role in participating and helping out clients in this process? What do we have?
Well, fortunately, despite the COVID situation, you know, what's really been circulating on the press right now has been the massive ability of Mozambique LNG, the Area 1 block's leading operator Total, their ability to secure the funding for the project of $15 billion. So Absa has been privileged to be one of the key financial partners, key commercial banks participating in that. We happen to be one of the biggest commercial banks in terms of our funding commitment for that. We've also been able to secure, apart from the project finance roles, we've secured, you know, an agency role in the project. We've also been able to secure some onshore banking account roles. And apart from that, one of the areas where we're really invested on is in supporting the value chain. So right now, there are a lot of discussions happening in terms of how we can partner with the value chain. We do have quite unique funding models to support a lot of local SMEs, and also not necessarily local SMEs that may have some financial capacity. And obviously, the risk profile does change positively on the back of offtake agreements that they do have with these gas projects. So it's quite immense. And apart from that, we do also publish and distribute a lot of the work that we do. I do work closely with the team on research on the sector, and that's information that we do also publish just to provide it.
So thank you, Hermano. Thank you, Hermano. So what I do get from this is that because of COVID and because of the social distancing, communication with our partners and has been quite impacted. So proactively reaching out to critical suppliers to understand how they're adapting their operating models can provide insight needed to make key decisions. So from you, I would like to know, how has the engagement been with participating agents? How has communication with stakeholders been affected in this period? Before getting to Gordon, Hermano, could you just please also shed some light here?
Yes, that's a very interesting question, because obviously the world has changed quite drastically over the last few months. When the pandemic did hit us, that was one of the first concerns. How is the engagement going to be affected? And funny enough, things have turned out much more positively than we expected. The engagements have been very frequent. The kinds of challenges we're hearing on the ground have changed slightly. And I think we've positioned ourselves really well in terms of how we can support them. So in a nutshell, we do notice that, let's say, a lot of local suppliers, especially those that are top candidates in terms of their need for financial capacity, and also their needs in terms of funding models that can accommodate them given the risk profile. We've noticed that there's some challenges have arisen that have affected the cost structure, especially due to logistics issues. We've noticed that the protocol of delivery of goods has changed, and to some degree, it does have cost implications for a lot of local suppliers. And obviously, we can't ignore the fact that, especially in the first few months when the market was disrupted, there was an immense shock that really impacted the prices of oil and gas globally. And when that happens, whenever you see a decline in oil and gas prices, you see a decline in capital spending. And just to give an idea, globally, the oil sector has cut back in capital spending about over $50 billion. So that does mean that a lot of the players that have stuck to their commitment in terms of investment, they're likely to revise downwards their cost structure, which would translate to some suppliers facing pressure in terms of downward negotiations on the value of the contract, which really affects the top line of a lot of players.
Thank you, Hermano, for that. That brings me to a bridging point and bridging question to Gordon. Gordon, amidst all of these shocks, how do we efficiently and effectively communicate mutual stresses and promote an open and transparent approach to supply chain management with your experience amidst such unprecedented shock that we observe as of late?
Well, thank you, Ernesto. Communication is the key. And much of what Hermano said rings true for me. The supply chain are under pressure. There's no doubt about that. Here in the UK and in Canada and in Norway, we see people, platforms like this are being used far more. And I think people are adapting to the new norm. Since 2014, when the last oil price shock, coming up to COVID, it's when things are difficult, the strength of these big players' balance sheets, their experience, and their expertise from the many, the large teams that they have around the world is going to be absolutely crucial. These guys, some of these companies have got balance sheets bigger than countries. And that's the kind of strength you need to invest in the front end of some of the larger projects in the world. And it will be the larger projects, in my view, going forward, that will be more cost effective. And as we go towards, as we will enter the transition to a lower carbon future, I think they will be looking for longer term projects that will be 20, 30, 40 years until the transition is effected. So, you know, and Mozambique are in a really strong position, Absa, Eni, Total, companies like that, interested and working to develop the resource.
Great, thank you, Gordon. So comparability is important for context, especially given the fact that this is one of the largest projects in the world, and Mozambique has yet to experience and gain a lot of know-how going forward. So, Hermano, these are capital-intensive projects that require meticulous preparation. Given our nascent rise in the ranks as a key player, as you rightfully mentioned, in the sector, can Mozambique learn from others? Is there something that you find distinctive and salient or progress with?
Yes, absolutely. You know, local development, proper localization strategy is very key. It's something that's very key to my heart. I believe it's also key to the hearts of a lot of Mozambicans. It's also very key to the heart of our organization. So there are immense projects that we can learn from. I think Mozambique, given the magnitude and the timing of the discovery of the immense gas reserves that really put us on the map, we have an awesome opportunity to learn from a lot of case studies. So it was quite interesting to hear some of the case studies that Gordon did share from the likes of Guyana. And I'd like to just share a bit on some of the case studies that we do have in Africa. Maybe just to provide a snapshot of some positive examples and some not so positive examples that I guess we can learn from. So we've noticed that, you know, just by talking to the oil companies, that there have been interrogations and questions from the CSOs, the civil society organizations, and there have been a lot of valid questions that have been asked, and that's very positive to see. So I think in terms of one of the best examples that we do have in Africa, if not the best, is Ghana. In terms of, you know, from the policy drafting to how, you know, since the first oil that happened in the early 2010s did eventually trickle down throughout the economy and saw sustainable economic development. So I think you know, the fact that the Ghanaian government had gotten advisory from Norway in terms of drafting, you know, the policies for local content development, and with Norway being a country that has one of the biggest oil companies in the world, which is formerly Statoil. Learned discussions with just of the government has really been positive. So since first gas in 2010, I like you know, the first oil investment in Ghana is an example. We've seen that there has been the government can use the tax revenue to develop other sectors in the economy. Sometimes they propose, for instance, X% to be used to develop the infrastructure, X% to be used to develop agriculture, X% to be used to kind of like industrialize other sectors. So what do we see today? When you industrialize other sectors, you have a bigger industry that is capable of supplying the oil. And as a result, the payables for supplies for the oil sector do circulate within the local economy more. When you industrialize the agricultural sector, it does enhance the food security of the nation. And it also puts less pressure towards the nation in terms of being a net importer. And obviously, when you develop infrastructure, it leads to efficiency of transporting goods and services up and down. And if you look at the context of Mozambique, that really is a hindrance for the development of the agricultural sector. So as a result, 10 years later, for instance, first oil was 2010 in Ghana, and around 2018, the economy, the GDP doubled. So you see the oil and gas sector contributing more to the GDP growth. You also see that the agricultural growth has consequently grown, and obviously the service sector also grew because of the industrialization. That's a good example that we can learn from. So with successful policy implementation, looking at that case study, Mozambique, we all agree that the agricultural sector has immense potential. It contributes to 24–25% of GDP. It employs perhaps over 80% of the workforce of the population. So it's very labor intensive. But yet, it only utilizes less than 15% of the arable land. So there's immense potential for development. So if you look at the forecast of the tax revenue, on average, by the 4th or 5th year, the Rovuma project, Coralif LNG project, Mozambique LNG project are each going to generate at least $1 billion of tax revenue. And if that's channeled correctly, there's immense potential for that. Imagine with the agricultural sector, resources are invested to enhance, improve the production of subsistence farmers, to enhance technology, to kind of like reduce the failure rates. So that could cause Mozambique to be less of a net importer in terms of agricultural goods, and that's just an example of how proper localization strategy can lead to sustainable development across the economy.
Thank you, Romano. That will be very useful. So institutional capacity, diversification of the economy are very important for the trickle-down effects of such high revenue generating projects. So I will come back to you on our Q&A questions to give an assessment and have your opinion about where we stand as a nation today amidst those comparisons that are very fundamental for the success of this project. So just another reminder, thank you all for attending. Your active participation is important throughout the session, so please do pour in your questions and we will address them in due time when it comes. So Gordon, back to you. With the COVID situation, businesses will likely come through increased workplace regulation, travel restrictions, reduced demand, global demand, delayed investments likely in disrupted supply chains. How important is it to invest and plan in local communities in terms of coordination? With involvement in Cabo Delgado, we are very aware of that, the Cabo Delgado development footprint. What appears more salient to you, the conversations you had then and now? Where should the government and other stakeholders, including the business people, be focusing on in terms of aligning resources?
Yes, thank you, Ernesto. Firstly, let me say a little bit about the work that I did complete 4 years ago at the invitation of the government in Mozambique and sponsored by the British government's Prosperity Fund. This work was about creating the right conditions for Pemba and Cabo Delgado to help in the successful host of an international energy industry. At the same time, trying to help the Mozambican supply chain. And I was asked to bring to bear my experience in working around the world with countries in similar circumstances, such as Brazil, Ghana, and even places like Canada. And of course, my experience in Aberdeen. And I was very lucky as well to be Secretary General of the World Energy Cities Partnership, which gave me a good overall view in relation to development issues. The conclusion of that work was basically three recommendations. Firstly, a rigorous and transparent land use planning system, including a long-term structure plan with associated local plans, and side by side with that, an strategic infrastructure investment plan. Secondly, there's a socio-economic strategy and delivery plan, which would focus on the important development of human capital through education and training. And of course, also the previously mentioned development of the indigenous supply chain that Hermano is so dedicated to. And thirdly, an inward investment plan, which would focus on international investors and companies not resident in Mozambique. So, but some of them are necessary to help the execution of the projects. But what we should be looking at there is to look at the potential for joint ventures with local companies. Now in Aberdeen, when oil first came, just to draw a comparison in oil and gas, there were no laws passed there in relation to local content. yet Aberdeen has managed to become a global oil and gas, no, not a global oil and gas, but a global energy hub, because it has made that transition. In Aberdeen, it all took time, but through working closely with oil majors such as BP, Shell, Exxon and Total and local businesses, the supply chain there was able to achieve the required standards and certifications to allow them to basically compete in procurement and win work. And this was supported by organisations such as the North East Scotland Development Authority at that time, who supplied finance through loans and grants. And that was almost nearly always syndicated with the major banks. So that piece of government and the banks working together is really important in relation to developing the supply chain. And again, it took time. And I mean, oil was discovered firstly in Aberdeen in their growth field in 1969. First oil was quite quick, 1975, but it was not until the major oil price crash in 1985, when 3,000 Americans left Aberdeen almost overnight. It was only after that that Aberdeen started to have be not dependent on others and had a supply chain developed. So, you know, it does take time. But the important thing here is that local content legislation is important, but without the support to develop indigenous businesses from government and the banks, it can be next to worthless. And I've been impressed, and the listeners, they have not asked me to say this, but I've been seriously impressed with Absa's commitment to developing the supply chain in Mozambique. International companies, I think I want to say a little bit about international companies in this piece as well, because that's core to the work in Pemba and Cabo Delgado. And international companies of all sizes will be interested in Mozambique, but they will also be looking at Brazil, Guyana, and Ghana, and Senegal, and other competing locations. And when companies are looking at new international opportunities, they're also thinking about their employees and their families, and in particular their health and safety and working conditions, before they decide whether and how to enter the market. What we essentially want is for those companies to put their roots down and start to integrate with the local community and employ local people. They look for modern housing, schools that teach to an international standard, good hospitals and healthcare systems. They're looking for good modern offices and business parks, and of course, good communications, even more important now, where there's going to be more remote working for offshore, but also more home working. Absolutely crucial. So I've been recently approached by a UK company called Nash Consultants to work alongside them to help deliver some of my initial blueprint plans. And this is a proposal that's under development at present, and it's being supported by the UK High Commission in Maputo, and I thank them for their leadership in this. So I'm carefully considering this at present, and after the work is updated, and I am quite sure that Pemba and Cabo Delgado would benefit from this and potentially become a hub for East African energy, not just for Mozambique. I do see a real focus, a real opportunity like Aberdeen did in Europe. If we can get both local and international commitment to make this work, there is a real opportunity there. So we should be looking forward and being optimistic at this moment in time, I believe, but we do need a degree of planning to make sure that that happens.
Thank you, Gordon. Under the risk of sounding redundant, I just want to hear from you. What is the role that government and upstream operators in this situation for Mozambique? What is their role to provide and improve resilience and reduce the risks of the most vulnerable businesses? I'm talking about the businesses that have just recently set themselves up to serve this opportunity and cooperate in the development of the country. They may be liquidity scarce. They may have knowledge transfer absorption capacity is still very high. So how do these two specific stakeholders play a role in terms of providing resilience and reduce the risks for these small companies?
Yes, Ernesto, that's a really good question and a crucial question, I think. This is where my insolvency background perhaps comes into play. But the role is important there because cash is everything just now. And the ability of small businesses to exist going forward is dependent on government and the oil and gas companies, and indeed the banks as well, coming together to make sure they get paid when they are due to be paid, at a time when the oil companies are committed to reduce costs. The plea would be to work with those small companies, with the supply chain, to ensure that they receive payment to help their cash position. I think that is absolutely vital. Liquidity is everything for these young, potentially good, strong businesses going forward, but they're at a difficult time at this moment in time.
Thank you, Gordon. Thank you so much. We've been receiving so many questions from all of you participating. Before we begin, I would like to pull out a poll concerning one of the points that Hermano had brought up recently in the beginning of our conversation in terms of the institutional capacity as well as diversification to the economy. So I would like to know from our participants the following. What is your sentiment towards the gas project developments in Mozambique? Please pour in your answers as they come in, and that gives me some time to see some of the questions that you've posed to us. And Hermano, get ready. This one is for you first, but let's just first get the answers from everyone. Only 50% have answered on our poll so far. I'll wait until 60% threshold. Is my economics background here, making sure that this is statistically significant, free of any manipulations. And I can assure you that these are all your answers. We did not play with the numbers. So closing the poll now, the results suggest optimistic. Very, 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 very good. So Hermano, I will jump onto you. Before, I would like to know from you, what do you think is Mozambique in terms of where do we stand potentially, I would hope, away from the resource curse in terms of diversification of the economy and institutional capacity and these metrics that the field requires us to monitor? Where do we stand as an economy and the readiness to move forward?
Okay. Firstly, I'd like to just briefly comment. It's quite encouraging. I saw that 86% of the crowd either are very optimistic or optimistic about the gas project developments in Mozambique, which is a very positive thing. So regarding resource curse, right? So I'd like to start by briefly defining resource curse and Dutch disease. So resource curse in a nutshell is when there's high dependence on the natural resource or extractive sector. So in the context of Mozambique, resource curse would mean too much high dependence on the gas sector for government revenue contribution, for export contribution, and also overall GDP contribution. Because that would mean that if there's any shock in the oil and gas sector, it's going to immensely impact the whole economic development of Mozambique. On the other hand, Dutch disease would be, let's say in an economy, I'll give an example of Nigeria that's been trading oil and gas since the 1950s. So Dutch disease happens whenever an economy starts exporting a lot of oil and gas. And as a result, especially net exporting economies, as a result of their currency appreciating with a lot of foreign currency liquidity entering into the market, that appreciation can cause other exported goods and other exporting sectors to become not competitive to other countries. And as a result, you start seeing other sectors' exports shrinking, the tax revenue shrinks, the employment shrinks, and the overall GDP contribution of other sectors shrinks because of the effect that the oil and gas sector is having. So we've seen that happen in Gabon, where Gabon was very strong exporter of bananas, and all of a sudden the oil exports in the country made banana purchases from foreign countries all of a sudden not competitive for Gabon. We've also seen that in Nigeria, where in certain regions unemployment actually increased as the oil sector exported more and the oil sector contributed more to the tax revenue of the government. And that caused jobs to be lost in other sectors to become less competitive. So I would say that the biggest risk for Mozambique is more the resource curse. And I think the distinguishing factor and the key point would be the success of the localization strategy, the success of the implementation of local content policies that would cause the trickle-down effect, right? Because going back to Ghana as an example, the good thing that Ghana did was to use the oil revenue and to kind of like invest in other sectors. And all of a sudden you saw a trickle-down effect in sustainable growth. So right now with the oil, the shock that happened in the oil sector as a result of COVID, that caused the oil trading, the oil demand to go down, and it kind of weakened the oil sector. But as a result of the trickle-down effect that happened over time, you have a more sustainable agricultural sector and service sector. So the biggest risk in a nutshell in Mozambique is more the resource curse. So policy implementation is very key for that, and the right discussions are happening. And I believe that our government is taking notes from some of the examples that we have in Africa and even across the world in that sense.
Thank you, Hermano. Thank you so much for your contributions. I'll pull another question out here. It can be addressed by both of you, but I will focus on Gordon for this one. Although local content legislation does exist in Mozambique, it's not very clearly set out what is considered local. How have different countries defined this in terms of local participation, successful or not?
Yeah, that's an ongoing debate wherever I have worked. Most recently in Canada and Newfoundland, there's been where you would expect there's quite a bit of local content, and indeed there is, and they have benefit plans and benefits agreements with oil companies prior to being allowed to develop a resource. There at the moment, they're debating what local content means again, and they've been producing oil for the last 20 odd years from Hibernia, and does local mean a company that is registered in Mozambique, or how long have they been in Mozambique? It's a very, very open debate. But I think I would go back to the Aberdeen example, and to some degree the Norway example, the Scottish and the Norway example, the Norwegian examples, where joint ventures were important. In Norway, you had to be registered in Norway, so in the face of it, many of their companies were Norwegian, but they were in joint ventures with companies from elsewhere. And the same was the case in Aberdeen, despite the lack of local content requirements. It's joint ventures that are really, really important to get the transfer of technology and expertise across until the local companies can really participate at some of the technological levels. But right across, I mean, I would expect in terms of local content that with a bit of support in relation to the understanding of the standards that are required, things like ISO 9001, and clearly helping companies to get to that point, that local companies, that is Mozambican companies, can provide very, very quickly much of the work in some of the non-technical areas in particular. Little story I remember telling a group from Mozambique was when I was a young man working in the summer holidays from university. The guys who were working with me were going to farms at night to learn how to weld simply, because McDermott's across in Aberdeen were building oil rigs, and they had a test, and you had to show that you could weld two bits of steel together, two bits of metal together, and they had their own school, to teach the guys how to weld, and things like welding, things like food, but also much wider than that, and some more skilled areas, things like rope access and etc. All of that can be done almost, 100% locally. And I don't mean to be disparaging there, but that's how Aberdeen built, from a low base with no oil and gas experience. And now there's over 1,000 companies in the supply chain in the city of Aberdeen, and they're exporting globally. There's no reason why Mozambique can't use their piece to build that up as well.
So thank you, Gordon. Hermano, I'll jump onto you. It's a hybrid question that I've received from the audience. Besides LNG, especially because, just to contextualize this, the oil and gas industry has a vast ecosystem, and banks stand in a unique position to address multiple agents within the industry. So AS find itself in a vantage point. So the question is, besides LNG, is Absa thinking or interested in partaking directly or indirectly on the other projects in the pipeline in Mozambique? For instance, Rovuma LNG, which has been delayed. So, Hermano, do you have any input on that? Besides the Rovuma bases basin project is what is our role overall in the on the ecosystem in Mozambique?
Okay, sure. So apart from Mozambique LNG that's ongoing, Rovuma LNG that has been delayed, and by the way, we are still in contact with the parties, and we do expect, a lot of sources, credible sources, do speculate that around 2021, that's when the project's likely to kick off. We're also forward-looking. We mustn't ignore the fact that the Anguash block is also the future of Mozambique. A lot of exploration efforts are to be done there, and that's going to be crude oil. So it's going to be a bit different from the Rovuma LNG that's predominantly gas. So we're also quite supportive in the Mozambique basin. We as a bank do also look at other ecosystems, because the same way that the risk of resource curse is very high when a government focuses too much on the extractive sector, the risk for us as an institution would be too high if we only focus on the oil and gas sector. So the key value chains that we look at apart from that is also the agribusiness sector, the consumer diversified sector, as well as the infrastructure sector. That's where we're playing a key role.
Thank you, Hermano. Next question, Gordon. There's been, because of COVID, there have been delays everywhere in the supply chain. So I would like to ask you, with the support of the audience, with this synthetic breathing space, what are some opportunities that local stakeholders can leverage on during this whole period in preparation for future developments in the sector? And I would like to add there as well, because you had mentioned about the preparation for SMEs and joint ventures and application for quality certifications and so on. So I would like to combine that question to ask you, how important is to coordinate efforts across what would have been otherwise competing firms for the same project as it is right now? Because financing has been stricter, and as well as just general preparation for the projects, whether it's finance, human capital, and so on. So is there a win-win partnership between what would have otherwise been local competing firms? What can they make use of this time of uncertainty here to create more value?
Yes, and Ernesto, that's again an excellent question. I think it's a time to take stock, as you say, and particularly when you speak about local competing companies, it's time where they can maybe look at how they can work together or work with others to provide the strength to really engage with the oil companies. What are the opportunities going forward? What is it really that the oil companies are looking for and are likely to look for? It's time to do a bit more research and work with the oil companies and what their procurement processes really mean. And it's time to really look at your business plan again and look at what the world's going to be like, because it was going to be challenging enough as it was, with huge opportunities as well, but challenges. What is it that you are good at, and how do you need to change, whether it be working with others, merging with others, going into joint ventures with others, to tackle the new reality going forward? And I think the speed that things will move at once those projects really kick off, they won't slow down. They'll go, once they kick off again, they'll go very quickly. We're in a kind of false position just now, but once the companies find that they're in a position to go forward, they will go forward rapidly. So use the time that there is just now to make sure that you're planning for that time when things will be going very, very, very quickly.
Thank you very much, Gordon. This is another question to both of you. I would like Hermano to take lead. Knowing the history of Ghana, it was necessary to have a full renegotiation of the first contract signed by the government. My question is, what the government has to do in order to guarantee a fair negotiation of this contract?
A fair negotiation of the contract. Okay, so I think there are some examples that can be followed. Like earlier on, I did highlight the fact that, Ghana did get advisory from a third party, being the Norse government. To be more specific, it was Global Development Organizations of Norway. So, in order for the contract to be fair, it needs to benefit the economy holistically. So it needs to be fair in the sense that if we look at Ghana, they did establish and clearly established targets in terms of contracting to local entities. There was clarity in terms of defining what local entities would be. Look at the context of Mozambique. There's a lot of discussion around local entities being classified as entities that are majority owned by Mozambique entities or Mozambican persons, which would be individual shareholders as well. And there's also targets in terms of employment targets. So apart from the contract negotiation, transparency and also evaluation is very key. So it's not enough just to negotiate the contracts, publish the contracts. There's 5 years from now, the companies start production and just let it go. Apart from setting the targets, it's very key to also evaluate and to look back. So for example, if, let's say by a certain year, if after 8 years of production, our target is that, the semi-skilled workers in the projects must be 50% local. And if it hits 45 or 40, there needs to be open dialogue between the government and the population to understand, okay, where do we get it wrong? What can we correct in order to speed things up in that direction? So I think apart from the contract negotiation, which I'm quite confident that the government is looking at the right aspects on, I think the monitoring and evaluation is very key as well.
Thank you.
Can I come in here, Ernesto? I think that's really important. I have chaired the negotiations with oil companies in the recent past, and really it is a negotiation, and it is very much subject to proper research and information, not just on the project, but what comparable projects are like around the world. So, the Exxons and Totals of this world, they have got projects elsewhere, and they know what the entry cost is there. They know projects that are running already. So you need to know as a negotiator what exactly you have to work with, because at the end of the day, it is competitive. And while I'm optimistic about Mozambique, at least for the next 20 odd years, with LNG being very much a transition fuel, there are others who have got gas. So you need to be informed when you're in there negotiating, when it comes to royalties and benefits and what you're going to allow against costs going forward. All of those issues need to be very well researched.
Thank you, Gordon. Thank you, Hermano, for such contributions. Very valuable. We have another question. I will have to apologize to the entire audience that we have not been able to address most of your questions, but we will return to you by email briefly. There's a particular question I'll take lead in answering. There's one that says, for many national professionals with a willingness to contribute to the country's development in this area, where and how will we have our opportunities? I would like to say that you already have the opportunity as it is right now. This is a project for all of us, and all of us are here to learn, and we're learning as we go along. The opportunities come out by simply first taking interest on what is going on, being part of the conversation, participating, hearing from others, brainstorming and seeing the opportunities, coming out of our comfort zone. We are the only ones that can lead our future with the greatest intention. So it's very important that, especially Mozambique in this area, we take lead on what is to come, and do not take a complacency role and expecting to be served. We are here to serve, and we are to serve collectively if we want to have a bright future. I would like to have final considerations from both of you gentlemen. I would like to start with Hermano, please, and then Gordon.
Well, on my side, I'd like to firstly thank everybody who's here, given that we all have very busy agendas, especially for the fact that, for most of us, things have gotten even busier with the pandemic arising. And I must say that it is quite positive to see that the majority of the people in the communities, in the professional community, are quite optimistic about the projects. The set of questions that were asked were quite interesting. It's very interesting to also see that there's a common interest for proper localization strategy. And it's really exciting to be a part of that, and I encourage all to be a part of that. We also look forward to supporting a lot of local enterprises in the journey. We also do have a heart for the community of female entrepreneurs as well that do also need specific support. We're also very supportive of the community of students. We're aware that there are a lot of talent in universities that have the potential to contribute to the future growth of our economy. Like, we're really open to hold your hands right now and journey together going forward.
Thank you. Communication and transparency and the expectations of the people. When I have travelled throughout the world, the expectation of the people and dealing with that and informing them, including in Aberdeen, where in the last 10 years I've had people tell me that Aberdeen has not benefited not a bit from the oil and gas industry because they personally have not seen it. But clearly it has hugely benefited. So that piece is important from terms of government and the oil and gas companies. Transparency, openness is very, very important. And I think there is a thing there about investing in Cabo Delgado. And for all the reasons I mentioned earlier, there is a real need to invest in the infrastructure and the people of Cabo Delgado who are on the doorstep of these developments in the first instance. And I think it's important, given that Mozambique is such a large country, that that there is a real focus on the community in Cabo Delgado. And that trickle-down effect will come right through the supply chain, through the whole of Mozambique. I have no doubt about that. That is clear. I just want to thank you for asking me to participate. It's been a pleasure in doing so. Thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you, Hermano, as well for your time. And your contributions are very well documented, and it provides groundwork for conversations to come. It's been a pleasure being with all of you today. Thank you all for accepting this invitation, and Absa for granting me the opportunity to moderate. I hope we are all able to contribute to the beginning of a long and exciting journey that belongs to all of us, and therefore it's up to all of us to participate. We look forward for inviting more vibrant voices, female voices, to enrich our discussion further. Until next time, guys, stay safe, and we are together.